Hello, folks. Welcome back to Management 5804, Leadership and Technology-Based Organization. I'm Dr. David Townsend, and this will be lecture 7.2. In this lecture, we're going to spend a few minutes talking about the technology adoption lifecycle. So as I mentioned before, right, the S-curve is kind of the fundamental pattern that we see within technology strategy in terms of how new ideas, new innovations, new technologies spread across different market environments. And so this technology adoption lifecycle now is going to allow us to explore this notion of psychographic factors that influence how customers evaluate and make buying decisions. So again, whereas disruptive innovation is a pattern that we can use to improve upon our broader framing strategies, not just relying on the prior history to figure out what's going to happen next. The technology adoption lifecycle is really our second critical pattern that we're going to highlight. And so again, this kind of explains from a customer perspective of why the S-curve, again, reflects the diffusion of new ideas, new products across market space. And so the technology adoption lifecycle, as the reading highlights, is really a reflection of the bell curve, right? And these different portions of the bell curve, which correspond to different, even the sort of standard deviation, if you will, of the different segments, explains that in these different categories the sequence of buyers that are going to purchase a product or service. And so there's going to be a couple of critical challenges that companies face when moving from customer segment to customer segment. And so as we talk about the sort of sequencing of strategic actions to reach these different customers really is what creates an enormous set of challenges for companies to reach their customers with new technology products and services. And so within that, right, one of the big tensions we'll highlight in this unit are the differences between early adopters and mainstream customers. And so for many new ideas, right, the early markets oftentimes give us false signals about the long-term viability of our product or service because we have people that are excited about it, but we're never able to really gain mainstream adoption or mainstream success. And so we're never really able to move past this early adopter market to reach the pragmatic mainstream customer. So this question of scaling as we move from the smaller segments into the bigger segments is going to be the real focus of this particular unit. But as we talk about, there's really five major categories across the technology adoption lifecycle. And so we've got the innovators, the visionary early adopters, right? We've got the early majority, the pragmatists, we've got late majority or the conservatives, and then we've got the laggards, the people that are most skeptical of technology products. And so, again, we've got to figure out unique strategies to reach these different customers as we move across these different stages because they have different expectations. The underlying psychographic profiles are different. And so the critical question, as we highlighted, is how do we go mainstream? Right? How do we go from reaching probably somewhere around 18% or so of a given market to be able to reach those pragmatic mainstream customers? And one of the major things that the reading hints at, and we'll spend a lot of time the next couple of weeks highlighting, is that the early markets oftentimes are buying things because they're enthusiastic about technology or because they're buying a change agent, right? So in many cases, they're actively looking for technological solutions like this. But if you're going after the mainstream, the early majority, right, the mainstream market, they want productivity improvements, right? They're not buying something because it's the newfangled whiz-bang gizmo, right? They're buying things because it specifically makes their life just a little bit better, right? It adds to the things they currently already do. And so, in a business-to-business setting, these companies who are mainstream don't want the technology to revolutionize their business. They just want some marginal improvement. And so, for these reasons, right, early markets are not great reference points for the kind of mainstream markets. And as the reading highlights, right, this is kind of this little Zen proverb we'll highlight over and over again. This notion that first there seems to be a market, right? There's lots of enthusiasm, and then the market goes away, and then it reappears again, right? And that sort of reappearance as the market goes through a significant shift in terms of what customers expect and want is going to be the critical issue. So again, we'll talk about this tension as we kind of move through this cycle from enthusiasts to visionaries to pragmatists to conservatives, and we kind of cycle through over, throughout these different customer segments. the strategic options that we pursue in terms of how we try to reach these customers are going to be really crucial. And so early markets, as I've hinted at already in the reading, kind of briefly highlights, again, are probably somewhere between 14 to 18% broadly of a market. And innovators are people usually that are technology enthusiasts. And so we saw a lot of this with Google Glass, right? And so just a small number of customers were buying it, and but there were people that love new technologies and are purchasing things like Google Glass purely for the again, for the pleasure of exploring something new. And so they didn't really care how Google Glass looked. They didn't necessarily care how well it functioned per se, as long as it gave them some new things to experiment with. And so these enthusiasts can oftentimes play a central role in product endorsement, and you can see that with lots of high-profile technologists who were early customers of Google Glass that were endorsing it, but then eventually changed again as it really failed to catch on. But they're different than early adopters, and so there's a little bit of a gap between innovators and early adopters in that early adopters aren't necessarily enthusiasts per se about a technology, but they're people who understand and appreciate the benefits of a technology. And because they're actively looking for a technological solution to their problem, right, they're willing to try things before others do it. But they want something that's going to revolutionize or change or influence something within their life or their business in very fundamental ways. And so, again, where enthusiasts are buying it simply for the novelty, early adopters are buying it because fundamentally it solves a problem for them, right? It addresses some particular unmet need or unmet want that they have. And so, early adopters are willing to take risks, right? They don't need well-established references to make that purchasing decision, but they do need something that is targeted towards them effectively in order to solve a particular problem that they have. But mainstream markets differ, right? An early majority and late majority are where the majority of our customers are, right? These are the kind of one standard deviations, if you will. So about 68% of our market, 2/3 basically of all the people that are going to buy our product are going to come from these two different segments. But the early majority, again, differs fundamentally from the visionary early adopter who's buying a change agent, who wants something that's going to make their life dramatically better. Early majority, these customers are pragmatic, right? Their specific buying motivations are they want it to do something, at the margin. They don't need a huge productivity change. They don't need a massive, new game-changing product. They certainly aren't enthusiasts where they're looking to impress their friends or neighbors that they're the ones that are first wearing Google Glass, right? These are people that are content to wait and see how a product works before they buy it. And so they oftentimes need well-established references. And one of the things we'll also talk about is actually for early majority, it's important to have competitors. It's important to have people, or competitors offering products that are similar to ours, because the early majority people can then compare to make sure they're getting a great deal, to make sure that this is something that fundamentally works. In the late majority, again, another almost third of our market, they're people that aren't comfortable with the new technology that we're trying to introduce. And they're going to oftentimes wait until something really becomes the standard, right? So these were people that bought the iPhone but started maybe with the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 5. That was the first time they switched from their flip phone to the smartphone, because now smartphones became the standard. And so here, they don't necessarily need references. Product endorsements aren't going to influence them. If they had, they would have purchased it already. They're just waiting for something to basically become the expectation or the standard. And one of my family members had a job and was forced to buy a smartphone. I won't say who it was, but was forced to buy a smartphone in order to manage their particular job. And so again, this is somebody who's very much resides in that late majority, somebody who's not necessarily looking to purchase something right out of the gate. Then the last piece is the sort of last segment is the laggards, right? And these are people that are technology phobic, and they won't knowingly purchase something that's brand new, a brand new technology, unless they're basically forced to, and so they're really the last segment. And typically by this point, because disruption really starts to happen, the more successful we are going into the early majority. And so as we kind of shift into the early majority and maybe go fully into Main Street to start to reach those conservatives. And again, I think in the back of your mind now, you're starting to see why companies start to shift towards sustaining innovations, given some of the buying motivations. that critical distance there means that disruption is already happening. And so for most companies, incumbent companies, they don't typically go after laggards because by this time they're really actively trying to manage that dual transformation problem, trying to reach new sets of customers, new technology enthusiasts, new early adopters. And so the laggards really are here captured by the companies that fail to respond to the new disruption. And so at the heart of this, again, is this chasm. And as we'll talk about, there's major differences in terms of what different customer segments want, but the major gap really happens between early adopters and early majority. And so moving from early to mainstream markets is a critical strategic challenge that we'll cover in quite a bit of detail over the semester.